In his posthumously published book, Worldly Theology, the hermeneutical focus of an historical faith. What a subtitle. The late 20th century theologian and professor of systematic theology just down yonder at Drew Theological School, Carl Michelson, offers an exercise for folks who are trying to make sense of any one of Jesus' parables. Whenever you encounter one of his parables, he says, ask yourself these two questions. Which character is Jesus, and which character are we? Which character is Jesus, and which character are we? Jesus' parables can often be enigmatic and hard to decipher. So starting with your interpretive work with these two questions offers some solid footing to begin the hard work of unpacking those theologically dense short stories. So if we were to ask that question for today's parable, which character do we think would be Jesus? And which character do we think would be us? Well, the classical answer to that question would certainly be that Jesus is the judge, and we are the widow. There's always this reflexive impulse in the Western church to identify Jesus with power and with authority. And it's clear that in this story, the judge is the one with power and authority in spades. The judge receives and hears petitions. The judge grants reprieve and pardons. The judge is clearly the one who is in control of this situation, and the widow is at his mercy. So we, as the widow in this interpretation, are meant to be persistent in our faith. Keep on raising those petitions. Keep on showing up. Keep on keeping on, and eventually we will have our justice. Eventually we will be vindicated. Eventually our prayers will be answered. It's certainly one way to interpret this parable. And look, if that's the interpretation that you need to hear today, if that's the interpretation that inculcates holiness in you, the interpretation that draws you ever closer to God and to a more complete love of God and love of neighbor, then that's great. I'm not out here trying to yuck your yum. Go and serve the Lord. But maybe, just maybe, that's not you this morning. Maybe, just maybe, that's not your experience with this text. Maybe, just maybe, it doesn't reflect your experience with God. One of the most difficult things about this line of work is the question of why. Why in the wake of a tragedy? I prayed. Why did I get that diagnosis? I prayed. Why did I lose that job? I prayed. Why? Why can't they see my child in the way that I see my child? I prayed and I prayed and I prayed. Why did they have to die? It's a sad reality that we can never know what a day is going to bring. For any one of us, all it can take is one bad day for everything we know about ourselves and our place in the world to irrevocably change. And hearing a message along the lines of just pray harder can ring a tad hollow. In case you're ever wondering, that's the reason why I always introduce our prayer time the way that I do. I don't stand up here and promise that our prayers will be answered in the way that we want them to be answered. God is bigger than a vending machine, and our prayers are bigger than the loose change we might use to buy a pack of gum. We serve and we worship a God who is big enough to receive and hear all of our prayers. The prayers that we voice aloud, the prayers that we keep to ourselves, and the prayers that are known only to God and hide in the corners of our hearts. God receives all of them, the good, the bad, and the ugly, as the acts of faithful worship that they are. Because in my experience, the person asking that question of why isn't looking for a drawn-out theological treatise on the nature of suffering and divine justice. Instead, that why reveals a deep longing and need to be seen and heard and understood. It reveals a yearning for empathetic solidarity. But friends, that's the good news of the gospel of Jesus Christ. In life, in death, and in life beyond death, we are not alone. We have, each and every one of us, been given the greatest gift of all. We have been given the gift of each other. But the wonderful thing about Scripture is that it can contain a multiplicity of readings. There is more than one way to read and interpret and understand the text. So perhaps if this morning the more classical interpretation leaves you feeling wanting, then we can take a step back and try our hand at answering that question again. Which character is Jesus, and which character are we? How does our interpretation of this parable change if Jesus is not the judge, but if Jesus is instead the widow? The widow who never relents in her pursuit of justice. The widow who shows up again and again, presenting her case to the judge in spite of the judge's hardness of heart. For what it's worth, that's how our friend Carl Michelson from earlier answers that question. Jesus is, he writes, the importunate widow whose undeviating petition brings God's kingdom into the present. Grant me justice, she cries out, and she never stops. But if Jesus is the widow in this story, then that would have to make us the judge, right? The unjust judge, who neither feared God nor had respect for anyone. The judge who heard the widow's plea day after day after day, doing nothing. The judge who only relented, not because he had a lasting transformation of the heart or a desire to see justice done for the sake of justice itself, but because he grew tired and weary of the widow's persistence. If Jesus is the widow in this story, then that makes us the judge. And I'm going to be honest with you this morning, I don't know if I like that interpretive lens so much either. Not because I find it theologically problematic or harmful, but because I find it convicting. Because I know that there are voices out there crying out for justice all over. crying out for justice in our streets, crying out for justice across our communities and our nation, and crying out for justice around the world. All creation cries out for justice, if only we have the ears to hear it. And while I know that I don't have the power to bring about an end to all injustice by myself, I also know that I'm not totally powerless either. I do have agency. We all have agency to affect change in our own ways and in our own places, if only we have the will to use it. And that is what makes this parable so haunting. Because even though he did it for all the wrong reasons, even though he did it only to preserve his own comfort, the unjust judge did eventually relent. And yet, when the Son of Man comes, will he find faith on earth? Faith that hears the widow's petitions in our own lives and contexts and responds by seeing and hearing and understanding. Faith that responds by entering into empathetic solidarity with the widow across our world and responding not by doing what we can to make our own lives more easy and comfortable, but by joining our voices with hers in pursuit, a relentless pursuit of justice. Is that the kind of faith that the Son of Man will find when he comes on earth? It's opportune that the lectionary offers this gospel passage today, because it happens that this week our partners in ministry over at the General Board of Church and Society of the United Methodist Church are calling on United Methodists all around the world to participate in the 17th annual Congo Week, a week of activities that commemorates the millions of lives that have been lost in the Congo conflict, while celebrating the enormous human and natural potential that exists in that country. Because the sound of Jesus' persistent petition for justice can be heard from every corner of the world, from voices from every corner of the world, but for too long, far too many of us have failed to hear it, coming from the voices of our siblings across the Democratic Republic of the Congo. And so that's why I encourage you to take some time today and this week to go to congoweek.org and read through some of their resources. We will post some of them on our own Facebook and Instagram pages too. But there you'll find stories that lift up the Congo, stories that lift up its people, that lift up its heroes, stories that tell of its natural resources, stories that tell of its tragedies and histories of exploitation, and stories that tell of its resilience. You'll learn about how European powers carved up the continent of Africa and carved up the Congo in their own relentless pursuit of wealth. You'll learn about how Belgium's King Leopold II extracted vast personal and political wealth from the Congo's rubber trees in a cruel campaign of forced labor. You'll learn about how that same history of extraction is repeating itself today with the mining of minerals like cobalt and coltan, essential components of everything electrical that powers our lives, from our smartphones and our computers to our electric cars. You'll learn about how in 1961, Patrice Emery Lumumba, Congo's first democratically elected prime minister's rule lasted only months before he was overthrown and assassinated by Western economic powers. You'll learn about how coalitions of women and youth are coming together to build and maintain and sustain the DRC's future. And you'll learn about how the world's second largest rainforest is in the Congo, and how its survival is going to be vital in the fight against climate change. You'll learn about how some of the most vibrant and transformational United Methodist ministry contexts exist throughout the DRC. So friends, hear the widows' petitions for justice coming from our siblings in the Congo, and then act. Our own congressional representatives, Representative Paul Tonko and Senator Kirsten Gillibrand, have legislative committee assignments that deal directly with energy, the environment, and federal spending. And so as we, God willing, continue to transition to a green economy, access to minerals in the Congo has already fueled the tremendous loss of Congolese lives. So join your voices with the voices of Christ coming from the Congo, and tell Congressman Tonko and Senator Gillibrand that the sovereignty and integrity of the DRC and its people must be respected and maintained during this economic transition. Tell them that the DRC needs our foreign aid, that the Congo is the heart of the African continent, and that our own national and global security in the 21st century will depend on the welfare of the Congo. Or grab a buddy and do the same. Host a letter-writing party and break the silence. And tell them that you're doing this because you're a United Methodist, and that this is a direct ask from the people of the United Methodist Church, because that language comes straight from our own United Methodist book of resolutions, Resolution on the Democratic Republic of Congo, Hope for a Radiant Future. Because as Methodists, we are a praying people, but we are also a people who turn our prayers into action. That is always who we've been as a movement. And so as we prepare to close out, I would like to ask Charles to cue up the next slide and get ready to show a video. Because today is the start of Congo Week, I reached out to one of my own friends and partners in ministry, Michel, and asked him to prepare a video message for us. Michel is a graduate of Africa University and is a clergy member of the South Congo Annual Conference. He's currently serving as a chaplain at the Center of Excellence for HIV/AIDS Care at the University of Lubumbashi in the DRC. And so I asked him to offer up a prayer of intercession for his country and for his people, for us to hear and join in on. I left some copies of a transcription of the prayer in the back narthex. I invite you to pick a copy up on your way out. And let us come then and join our hearts together in prayer with Michel to the God who hears and receives all prayers. The prayers that we voice aloud, the prayers that we keep to ourselves, and the prayers that are heard by nobody else.
Michel Chinyama, I am a clergy in the South Congo Annual Conference in the Democratic Republic of Congo, a former student of Africa University and a student assistant chaplain at Africa University. Currently, I am on study leave. The General Board of Church and Society advertised that October 19, 2025 is the start of a week focused on advocacy for peace in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Here is my intercession prayers. God, out of your love, you created human beings in your own image and likeness. In your wisdom and true divine word, the rest of creation came to be. You placed everything and every creation in the world with a right to exist. Therefore, I pray that you grant us wisdom, humility, and love for each other in order to live in harmony, peace, and justice. I pray for your providence grace to enable us to safeguard the dignity of each person and creation. I pray for the Democratic Republic of Congo and Africa. May the churches in the Democratic Republic of Congo and Africa proclaim the word of your truth in love, even to those in power, those causing conflict and suffering to your people and creation. I pray for those who are affected, those in distress and need. I pray for those in power and for a mutual collaborative working relationship with the churches for the sake of our communities and all the people. Amen.